My number three is The Namesake from 2006, directed by Meera Nair, starring Carl Penn, Irfan Khan, Taboo, and a whole bunch of other folks. So, quick IMDb logliner on this movie. American-born Gogol, the son of an Indian immigrant, wants to fit in amongst his fellow New Yorkers despite his family's unwillingness to let go of their traditional ways. Yeah, sort of captures the movie, but really this movie is about what you just touched on, the American dream and the cost that it comes with. And especially for the first generation kids, what is their experience like?
Right.
I'm not a first generation kid, obviously. Like I immigrated here, so if I were to have children, then that would be their, I guess, circumstance. But it's a very interesting dynamic, which even though I didn't have that experience, I can empathize with it because I did grow up in the country from where these people come from. And
Mm-hmm.
even though I didn't have the same experience as they did when they grew up there, because I grew up in a different time and
Right.
different socioeconomic background, all of it. But I think any immigrant for that matter, or really any human, can relate with that, I think, because when you're often being disposed and displaced in some form or the other. But yeah, for me, this movie, I watched it, I would say pretty early on, right? When it came out, because it was like a
Mm.
big buzzy movie. Monsoon Wedding, which was directed also by Veera Nair, was like a big awards contender, won the BAFTA and such. So you're always proud when somebody whose work you're familiar with or they're from your own country is being recognized on the international stage. So
Mm-hmm.
that's what kind of got to me watching this movie. But then it has been interesting watching the movie over my life, like right when I moved to the US, to a little bit after, to more recently for this podcast, and to see how my relationship with it has changed. But some things have changed, but I think the few things that stand the test of time is that feeling of just moving to a new country with bag and baggage.
Mm-hmm.
You have no sense, even though you might speak the language, but you have no community, you have no sense of the day to day, what it takes, simple tasks. All of it is new, obviously. You have no standing in the society whatsoever. You're starting from ground zero. And I think this movie really captures that when the couple played by Irfan and Tabu, they move to the US, arranged marriage, they barely know each
Right.
other. I
Mm-hmm.
always think of that, those initial few scenes. So I think that theme of moving to the country and then as their kids grow up, their confusion, the typical term that's used is ABCD, American born confused Desi. This movie captures that uh, quite beautifully. But yeah, curious if you'd watched this movie before or not.
Yeah, I'd heard of it at the time, but did not see it until the podcast. I remember it did get a lot of buzz, and even I remember people talking about it like in my circles of like, oh, this is really interesting to check out. I just never kind of got around to it. And I really like the film a lot. It's interesting because it sort of touches on two different parts of the immigrant story, the actual immigrants who come over, and then that first generation. I think there's just different struggles, especially I'll call him the main character because Cal Penn's the actor that I knew kind of when I heard of this film the first time. So like his struggles about like, well, how is he real? Is he Indian? Is he American? How Indian does he want to be? How Indian does he feel? Like, where's his connection? And that feeling of being kind of caught between two worlds. And I'm sure is difficult for first generation folks really born anywhere, but I think especially in the United States, potentially just because you get the sense here that there is room for different cultures, but at the same time, there's an American culture that is very strong that parents kind of came over here usually because they wanted to be a part of that. And then what do you do then as the immigrant? How closely do you go with your heritage versus the new life that your parents came here to give you? And I think that the struggles in the film around that are really interesting and touching too, like really emotional, like the journey that he
Mhm.
goes on through all these ups and downs, through the relationships he has too. I thought that was interesting as well. Like the different
Mhm.
romantic relationships he has. One is waspy kind of American, and then the other it was sort of a more worldly traveled person sharing the same heritage as him, and how he really can't go with either. He has to find himself first, and I thought that was what was so powerful about this film for me.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then his relationship with his parents, that also kind of goes through all sorts of things. And, there's typical sort of teenage angst of like
Mm-hmm.
not wanting to be in the shadow of your parents and such. But in this case, there are other layers of because your home life and your school life are so opposite of each other because your home life is a little bit of a mirror of your home country or your parental home country versus your school life is American. So how do
Right.
you kind of figure out where do you belong and whose side are you at? But he's also not a sympathetic character.
No,
That's the
he makes
part.
mistakes.
He
Like
makes lots of
he
mistakes, and
does. Yeah.
I think that's the part that's changed as I watched the movie and I've grown up with it. Because when I was younger, I related to the Carlton character a lot because I was
Hmm.
like, oh yeah, if I were put in these shoes, this is how I would feel, and I would feel kind of lost and what have you. But then as I watched it more grown up, I feel like he makes a lot of mistakes, like most people do.
Right.
But I think what gets lost in him is that he loses sight of the support and love that he has from his parents, because his parents are actually quite amazing. They're not
Oh
actually
yeah.
forcing him to do anything. They're not
Right.
holding down that, oh,
Hmm.
everything has to be Indian or you have to be with an Indian person, or
Right.
there's none of that sort of typical stuff that's shown in the movies and I'm sure exists to some degree in real life as well. They're amazing. And he just loses sight of that because he lets all these pressures and these questions kind of take so much room in his psyche.
Right.
And
Right.
and I don't know, a part of me also wrestles with how does that happen? How did that happen to this kid? Because he had such a grounded home life with parents who are so caring. How did he get to that place? Because he's very extreme minded in his views. Like it has to
Hmm.
be one way or the other. And to me, that's perhaps the provocation of the movie and why it's interesting that you can look at it and sort of make your own mind, you know? I
Yeah.
am of the opinion that you can be both.
Right, right, right. I mean, I think maybe what he also kind of falls trapped to is something that potentially could be, very American too, of like, okay, like what do you want to do? How do you want to contribute to society? There's a lot of pressure in that decision that you make. Especially when you're young, right? What college you want to go to, what career you want to have, because so much of that this is oriented in the States, at least, around what do you contribute in terms of your work life. And maybe then there's added pressures there for him because he feels kind of lost anyway. There's a whole, I guess, allegory around his name being
Mhm.
something that he changes quite often too, which I think just is sort of saying he is wrestling with his own identity. So
Right.
maybe the pressures of the American life and assimilation that he felt added to that and makes him a little more extreme as he kind of thrashes around and tries to find what he wants to do. And he can't really relate to his parents. I think that's a normal thing too. Like
Right.
everyone's parents are going to be different, but in this
Right.
case, it's very different. They were immigrants who came over and made choices that he, I guess, didn't get to make, and I think that's part of what he wrestles with throughout the film too. So I do feel sympathy for him, though he doesn't make a lot of the best decisions, and I think you're right. He could have used a lot more of his parents' guidance, especially his father, when
Yeah.
his father was around, was able to give that. He just took it for granted. He took that for granted. I think his in a way maybe is like his heritage for granted, and what the Indian part of his culture would bring to him. He was trying
Mhm.
to, maybe had some issue with, oh, I don't want to, again, be too much like that. I want to fit in more with my kids,
Right.
my classmates or whatever in high school and college. So that was not at all my experience, and none of these things were anything I've ever experienced in life, but I've had friends that have gone through these things, and I definitely have a lot of sympathy and empathy for those types of situations that they're in. And
Yeah.
maybe it helped too that like Cal Penn was the only actor. Well, though now I know the dad. He was an actor
Yeah.
that I knew from a couple films after this one, but Cal Penn is the one I identified with, and maybe that helped me have more sympathy for him because
Yeah.
I'd seen him in other things.
Yeah. No, there's definitely sympathy. And that whole thing, I can definitely relate to that, even though I came here much older. But
Hmm.
initially you want to sort of fit in and you almost want to sort of distance yourself in some form or the other. There's a scale to that, obviously, from your own heritage because you want to fit in. So yeah, I sympathize with that part. I think the other thing is, which is also beautiful to see, is that yes, the parents, when they immigrated, it was crazy and the struggles were real and all of that, but they do end up making a pretty good home and life for
Oh yeah.
themselves. At the
Hmm.
very end, like Tabu, the mom, she has friends and has her own self-sustaining life, even though her husband has passed. So
Hmm.
I think that's the other important thing to note, is that it's going to be difficult when you move to a different place, no matter what it is. But you also have to commit to it. What are you doing to bring to the society? After all, you are the guest. And that's sort of my belief, is that you have to earn your way a little bit to be fully welcomed in this new place where you've landed. And they put that effort in. They stay committed throughout the struggles, and
Hmm.
and it ends up working. And of course, it's a two-sided thing. The place that you are at also has to, provide to you and such. So it can't be all one-sided. But I do think the onus is on the guest. At least
Sure,
that's
right.
how I've approached. Because before I lived here, I lived in Europe, and even though I had an amazing time, it was very clear to me that I actually couldn't make that home for myself, because the expectation to fit in a certain way in that society, which has even more layers, is even harder, actually. And like you said, there's a cost to different cultures coexisting in the US, but all in all, at least there is something in the roots of this place,
Right.
that it was made up by people from everywhere. And though it's not going to be easy, it's not going to be fair, but where is that anyway? That's not fair in my own country that I grew up in. So how can I expect that to happen anywhere else? You have to put in the work, but a lot of it is also just luck.
Sure. Right. Exactly. Yeah. No, I think I liked how this film touched on the beginnings of her journey, because it really was kind of focused on the mother in the beginning of being
Hmm.
isolated and lonely, and things. Yeah, there's some positive, like, oh, you can drink the water. The husband's saying, oh, things are, there's some nice things about it, but the weather sucked,
Yeah.
and she didn't really have any friends. But then once she found that community, a lot of them fellow immigrants too, I think, which is something that I thought was kind of powerful as well. That okay, once she found all those people that she could relate to more, then she seemed much, much happier, even though at the end of the movie she has her own journey too with her heritage, and
Yeah.
decides she wants to also make sure she doesn't lose touch with her Indian roots and her hometown and all those sorts of things, which I thought was great in the film, that it wasn't just about the son, which is what I expected when I started the movie. Is, oh, okay, I think I know what this is. And actually it deals a lot with the parents, and the son comes in kind of later on, and it becomes his story, but then switches back to the mom's story, which I thought also was really interesting, as that immigrant story versus first generation. And the
Yeah.
film was able to weave those two things together. And the one thing was maybe Cal Penn sometimes couldn't deliver on the acting side of things.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
he wasn't really quite there in some scenes that needed it, especially surrounded by much more talented actors, that have
Definitely.
clearly been doing this for decades. And,
Yeah.
with his parents, I'm talking about. And he just sometimes felt a little bit out of his depths, but I still think at the end of the day, like, he gave a great performance and I enjoyed the film.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, Irfan Khan is like an incredible actor.
Oh,
It
yeah.
still breaks my heart that we lost him so soon. I almost put him in that pantheon of character actors
Mm-hmm.
slash still leading men in my mind. Philip Seymour Hoffman, Robin Williams, and then Irfan Khan, who just
Mm-hmm.
a look, just a walk. I'll never forget him walking on the roof right before he passes on in this
Oh,
movie.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Everything is there in his body language. He
Mm-hmm.
knows the weight of his life, the sacrifices that were made, questions about the son, questions about the wife, what's going to happen if he is not around. It's all there. There's no dialogue. It's not even a close-up scene. It's like the camera is so far away. And I have to shout out to Mira Nair as well for trusting her actors to just do their thing and not, because this movie can be pretty heavy-handed because of its subject matter.
Mm-hmm.
It can be very on the nose, and sometimes it is, but for the most part, it's actually quite light on its feet, which I enjoy.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's my number three, The Namesake. In my mind, it is the American Dream movie, which comes with a lot of different layers.
Mm-hmm. Hey there, it's Alex. If you like the review and discussion Karan and I just had, make sure you subscribe to our channel, Movies That Shaped Us, to get full episodes. Every other Wednesday, Karan and I cover a topic around important people, places, events, and moments in our lives, and then explore it through 3 of our favorite movies. Subscribe right now, or follow our podcast on Spotify or Apple Podcasts via the link in the description below. Hope you join us for the journey.